All right. Today's results are about as bad as blind guessing. So the if you had just guessed one of the six options, 1 in 6 is what, like a little over 15%, like 17%. So got a 16% average. So I guess you should have just guessed. Would have been a better approach there today. This was a hard one to do in 5 minutes. Let's go look at the code and see what the biggest wrong answer was. Was B was the most common wrong answer. Interesting. Okay. So the answer was A there. Okay. Just a moment. All right. There is the source code for it, but let's not do it in code. Let's do it in a more advanced software. Let's do it in Paint. All right, so this line is going to be at 50. We're going to say this line's at 150, and this line is at 250. So that's 50, 150, 250. And everything's approximate, but obviously it doesn't matter. So filled shape with outline. I'm going to draw my squares in the order that they get drawn. So it's red first, and then pink. There's no good pink here. It's like purple. That's pink enough. All right, then pink, and then blue. Okay. That's how they started, so in the constructor. You know what? Let's do one even more advanced thing. I'm going to put them all on their own layer. That way they can realistically go on top of each other. So obviously the white background is going to get messed up and everything, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Whoops. Whoops. This is getting too complicated for starting the quiz out. Hopefully I stay under that 5-minute limit here. We'll see if I can still do it after all this fussing in Paint. Okay, there we go. So I have them all on different layers in the order that they're drawn. So red gets drawn first, pink gets drawn next, then blue gets drawn after. That's the order they appear in. And then the outline doesn't really matter for this example. Okay, so the first thing that happens is red's X gets set to pink's X. So go on to my red layer. That means red moves over to where pink is, which means now that it's on top of pink. But pink gets drawn after red, so pink would actually be the one that shows up there. Red gets drawn first, then pink. So it would actually look like this. Red moved over there, but pink gets drawn on top of it. All right. Blue's width got cut in half next. So blue's width equals pink's width divided by 2, but pink and blue have the same width, actually. They all have a width of 50. It's 50, 50, 50, 50 for red, 50-50 for pink, 50-50 for blue. Remember, those last two arguments are the width. So let's cut blue down to size, cut them in half. Whoops. Good enough. All right. Blue is now half of its normal size. Next, our pink's X location moved up by 50. So not quite over to 250, but over whatever, 50 units or whatnot. So obviously everything here is not even, but you get the idea. And then, so pink's X plus equal 50, pink moved up by 50 units. Remember, red is 50 units wide, so that puts pink right on the edge of red, and now red will be visible again. Red was behind pink, but now pink moved over 50 units to the right. And the last step was that blue's X is now equal to pink's X, but remember, blue is half of its normal size. So when it takes that spot, blue is the last to get drawn, so it does get drawn on top of pink. So we see all of red. We see blue next, the half of blue that we still have, the half width blue, and then the part of pink that sticks out from behind it. And hopefully that was the right answer because I already closed that window. Guess let me bring it back and make sure. Yes, it is. Okay, so that's it. Any questions? Looks like I was able to get in under that 5-minute mark there, despite my crazy painting skills there. So I recommend if you're trying to think through a complicated visual problem, you also mock it up in Paint. This one you can probably get the hang of eventually and not have to mock it up, but initially, anything like this level of complexity and above, I would try mocking it out in Paint or sketching it out by hand before you get too deeply into it. Mark all the different dimensions and stuff as closely as you can, and then try to get it to match your sketch. Okay. On we go. Let's keep going with the same code that we were looking at earlier. So I'm just going to continue adding to it, and then when I upload it to Canvas, I'll upload it as like part 2 or something. So you'll have a P1 and a P2. When we last left off, I had made 4 rectangle objects, and I had spaced them around. Oops. Let's see what I did wrong there was I didn't have the right main method open. And I need to have the one open for the swing intro for it to run this one. And some folks prefer, by the way, to just click on the package name and go to run as there. That works as well, but that's extra steps for me. I just make sure my main is open when I hit that run button. Okay, so yeah, we had made those 4 rectangles, and I think I had just showed you how to make text when we had just left off. And I said that we would leave font for later because font is kind of complicated. But if you would like to take the how do I make font challenge, it's going to be g.setFont and then new font, and then what do I put? What kind of arguments does font need? It's going to tell you it needs a string, int, and float for one of its constructors. That's the easiest one. We have a bunch of others that are even more complicated, but the easiest one is string, int, float, or string, int, int. So what do you need there? I'm going to leave that as an open question and see if anybody can figure it out. You have to probably look it up because it's quite complicated, but I'll just leave that as an open question, see if anyone can figure it out by researching it. And then I'll tell you later. Okay, let's leave a to-do there. To-do. Add a font. Today we're going to look at how to add mouse and keyboard events to your application. So the first part of that was adding these lines here, the implements mouse input listener and the implements key listener part, separated by columns. Now the next part is going to be adding these things to our constructor in order to get everything set up properly. So there are a few different lines that you need to add in order to get mouse and keyboard listening beyond these 2 lines here. So what is a listener, you might ask? It's a fancy term for something that awaits an event to happen, and then when that event happens, it will trigger some method in your code. So basically, when something happens with the mouse or keyboard, it will fire off one of these methods that it created for us down here, of which there are quite a few, and you can see they have different names. I'll go through those in a bit. Okay, so the magical things that you have to do, you have to add the mouse input listener and the keyboard listener to this panel. So this panel being obviously this. Again, our displays are all J panels. So we need to add a mouse input listener to this, supply it as an argument. Then we need to add a mouse motion listener. This is going to capture movements of the mouse, whereas the mouse listener only captures clicks. So if you want to be able to click and drag or capture movement, you're going to need the motion listener as well. And we're going to add a key listener. And then in order to get keyboard input, you have to do a couple of other things that you don't have to do for the mouse. The first thing you have to do is set the window to be focusable. And that means that, like, if I'm in a different window, if I'm in like Notepad or something and I'm typing in there, it's obviously not going to type in Eclipse, right? If I'm in this tab over here, then it's not going to type over in this tab when I type on the keyboard. That's what it means to be focusable. It means that that window is in focus. It's the one getting your key input. And so your operating system knows when you type, the text that you type is supposed to go only to the window that's in focus, generally speaking. There are very few applications that you can think of, if you can think of any, that take key inputs even when they're not in focus. So usually you only get typing in the window that you're currently in. That's what it means to be focusable. And that's the first thing you should check if you have problems getting keyboard input. Make sure you're actually clicked into the window you think that you're typing in. Make sure you're not still in Eclipse typing or somewhere else still typing. Another one that's not as important is set focus traversal keys. These are like the shift and alt keys and stuff for different things. So we're going to disable those guys. So these are like shift and alt keys for different events. So that doesn't super duper matter, but we're going to turn those off to prevent some annoying things. So all in all, these things, these lines here, add the listeners to this panel, and this line makes the window able to be in focus, which I kind of described already, but I'm not going to go into more detail. And this disables the shift and tab functions that some windows use. And that basically allows us to use those keys for ourselves. Alright, so that's all the setup you need to do. That was all done in the constructor, so I had my rectangle setting up here, and then I just did it later on. You could do it at the top. The order doesn't matter here, so I just needed to do all of those lines in the constructor for the panel. So I added those 5 lines to the constructor for the panel, and I made sure that I have those 2 implements there at the top, which we are again going to cover in more detail in a few weeks. Alright, so that's all you need to do to receive mouse input. Now let's go down and look at what all the different mouse input events do. So first let's look at mouse clicked. So let's just print something whenever the mouse is clicked. Let's see if this one works. Clicked. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and run this and see if I get anything. I'm clicking and I'm clicking, and I got 1 clicked. Alright, let's pop open the console again. There we go. I got it clicked, 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 clicked. All right, let's say I also want to print out the location that you clicked. So in every one of these event receiving methods, these listeners, they get an argument called the mouse event. So whenever an event is fired off, whenever the mouse reports that an event happened, it passes the event into this method, and that event contains all kinds of useful information that you're going to use to process that click properly. So we've got e dot, and then we've got get button, get click count, get ID, get modifiers, get when, so you can get the time of the click, all this other different stuff. The most important one to us is usually going to be the X and the Y location of the click. That's going to be the most important to us most of the time. So there are 2 ways to get that. There is a get X and a get Y. Alright. You can also get the X on the screen, which you're rarely going to do, but that gives you the absolute X and Y location in terms of the entire screen. So if your application runs in a window, you're generally not going to want to do that. You just want X and Y relative to the top corner. So don't get confused with that one. You're going to use get X and get Y usually. And then in addition to get X and get Y, you have the simpler version, which is get point. So we made a point class last time in our homework. Point in Java works the same way. The built-in one is just an X and a Y position and a couple of small utility methods. So I'm usually going to use that get point version instead because it's easier than having to get the X and the Y separately. And as we're going to see, a lot of the other classes in Swing, much like your contains method for the rectangle that you wrote, utilize points again, so you don't have to take 2 arguments. You can just take the 1. So let's try to print the point. As you can see, point has a 2-string method very much like the one you wrote, where it uses the name of the class, and then it tells you the X and the Y location. So up here in the corner is 0, 0. Over here is the maximum X got about 780. The window is 800 by 800, so that seems right. Over here is maximum y, so x is 7-ish, y is in the high 700s, and here should be about 800, 800, right? Okay, lovely. Now let's look at a little bit of eccentricity with click. So when I push the mouse down, nothing happens, right? When I release, nothing happens. So I push the mouse down, I release, nothing happens. Push, release, push, release, push, release, push, nothing, push, nothing, push, nothing, push, release, push, release, push, nothing. So what's the rule? Can anybody guess in either chat? When does on-click fire? I'm going to do it a few more times, so watch the console and tell me in either chat if you figured out the rule yet. Push, release, push, release, push, release, nothing happened, push, release, nothing happened, push, release, nothing happened, push, release, push, release, nothing happened. Anybody guess the rule yet? Push, release. Click, 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 click. What is the rule for mouse clicked? We'll do it a few more times. Push, release, nothing happened. Push, release, push, release, push, release, push, release, nothing happened. Push, release, nothing happened. So yeah, somebody figured out the rule. If the mouse moves between the press and release, you don't get a click event. All right, so you only get a click event if the mouse is pressed and released in roughly the same area. So if you move the mouse between press and release, you don't get one. And then I'm sure everybody noticed you only get the mouse event for the click when you release the mouse. So usually we want stuff to happen when the mouse is pressed. So usually we're not going to use on-click. Happens when the mouse is released, but not if it moved between press and release. So normally we don't use this one. I'll write that there too. Normally we don't use this one. I don't need an extra comment. Alright. Yeah, so normally we don't use the mouse clicked. So I'll just comment that out. Alright. Normally we're going to use pressed instead. Pressed, unlike clicked, goes off click, there it is, click, there it is, click, there it is, click, there it is, click, there it is. So it goes off where you press the button, and it goes off when the key goes down, or when the mouse button goes down, rather than when it lifts up. Okay, so pressed goes off as soon as you click. Click goes off actually when you release the click. So for most of the applications we're going to write, we're going to use pressed. So I know that can be a little bit confusing. Pressed goes off when the mouse goes down, when you first click it, and clicked goes off when you actually release the click, but only if it hasn't moved in the interim. Okay, then what is mouse released in that case? Let me comment out pressed for now. Let's put our guesses in on what mouse released is. What's the difference then between released and clicked? Let me show you for a bit, and then you can tell me if you've spotted the pattern. So press, release, 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 press, release. Anybody got the pattern yet? Click, 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 click. Press, release, press, release, press, release. Press, release, press, release, press, release, press, release. Press, release. Click, release, click, release, click, release. Anyone got the pattern yet? Then what differs it from click? So yeah, unlike click, release will trigger whenever the mouse is let go, regardless of whether it's moved. So release is obviously going to be really useful for things like ending a click and drag event, or I don't know, anything where you want to do something on mouse release. So we're looking at pressed, triggers when the mouse button is first pushed, and release triggers when the mouse is let go, even if it's moved. So unlike clicked. Okay. So useful one there. What is entered? What is entered? Entered comes from the move library, I think, the motion library instead of the click library. So those few we looked at, those come from the click library. Remember, we set two listeners at the top. We set the mouse listener and the mouse motion listener. So let's go back and look at the mouse entered one. Entered at. I got a printout right away as soon as the application started. And there's another, 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 and there's some more. And if I move the window, I can get different ones. Look at that. Look at it go. But if I move around inside the window, nothing. So this one should be pretty obvious, right? It's when the mouse enters the display window. So this triggers when the mouse pointer enters the display window, the panel, I guess I should say the panel. This one will be useful for detecting when the user first comes in. You might use this for, I don't know, a maze or something. And of course, this is going to be the same thing, just the opposite of that. So I'll just run it so you can see. But mouse exited is going to be just when you exit the window, obviously. Goodbye, window. There we go, so any direction. Now, the title bar does count as outside the panel, because we're talking about the panel here. Remember, we're not talking about the frame. The title bar is part of the frame, but not part of the panel. And you'll notice that sometimes I can get some pretty big numbers if I just jerk really fast, or numbers that are not realistic for the top there. So it doesn't guarantee that it's going to pick it up within some time interval, and you can get numbers that are pretty off if the user is moving the mouse really quickly. So sometimes the events don't fire fast enough for you to get super accurate readings if the user is really quick on the mouse. So trigger when the mouse pointer exits the panel. The dragged is going to be one that's going to be fairly useful for us here. So let's look at when the dragged event fires. And think about how it might differentiate from moved. What's going to be the difference between dragged and moved? So dragged gives you a lot in the console. So click, 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 click. Lots of stuff going on there. So the pattern there is pretty obvious, right? When you've clicked, the drag event starts, and then it doesn't stop until you release. So triggers when you press down, and stops when you release. Unlike move, notice I'm deleting the to-do stubs as I successfully edit these. You should make that a habit too. Don't leave to-do stubs in your code after you've edited the auto-generated method for you. Those are just supposed to be a warning that Eclipse auto-generated it for you and that you have not done anything with it yet. So unlike dragged, moved fires off whenever the mouse is moved, but it doesn't fire off when the mouse is outside the window. So a mouse has to be inside of the panel window, and then anytime it moves, you get obviously the move event firing off. So this is the most I guess, common event that's firing all the time, anytime the mouse is moved. You can get some pretty good precision in move, too. It fires many times, like maybe, I don't know, 60 a second or something. It's quite fast. Dragged and all of those are fast as well, but the moved events are faster than, for example, the enter and exit ones. You can actually, if you want better precision, you can use moved instead of enter and exit. Triggers anytime the mouse is moved inside the panel. That brings us to the key events. We've got key typed, key pressed, and key released. These are going to follow the same principle that the mouse events did, where there's going to be one that triggers on press, one that triggers on release, and then one that detects whether a key is typed, much like the clicked event, and that's going to be the one we usually don't use. So typically, don't use this one. Generally, we won't use this one, but let's see how it works. And notice that the key event doesn't have a get point. Of course, that doesn't make sense, because there is no point of your key presses. So let's see what it does have. It's got get key care, get key code, get extended key code, get when. Not a lot, actually, right? And then it has a bunch of constants, tons and tons of them. And these are all the different keys that one could have on the keyboard. So all the letters of the alphabet, shifts, alts, the arrow keys, all of those are mapped to a constant here, so you can check for equality. And then we have some other stuff that we're not going to use. So I'm going to do e.get key character in order to print out the character that we pressed. And then I'm also going to, well, let's add it on the same line. I'm going to print out the key code. If you took the processing version of 128, the codes should be familiar to you. Every key on the keyboard also gets a code. So A is 0, S 0, D 0, F 0. What's going on here? Why are they all 0? How about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? Also all 0. Space, control, gives me nothing. Shift, nothing. Alt, nothing. So remember I disabled those. And some other keys here. La, la, la. See me typing. Wonderful. So A pressed down, and it continues to type it. Okay, this is the typical behavior when you're using an application with the keyboard, right? When you press a key, it goes off, and then there's a little delay, which is set by the application. It depends on what application you're in, right? And then after that delay, it types it a bunch more times. That's usually not the behavior we want. We usually just want to do everything once. We're not going to write any like typing applications. But if you want realistic typing, the way, Notepad or anything else, or Eclipse has typing, so Eclipse has typing like if I type A and then I wait a bit, I get more A's. That's expected. So if you want that behavior, then use key typed. It's just generally in this class, we don't want that behavior. So we might look at key code again later, but yeah, we might look at it later. But usually you're going to look at the key care to make comparisons. And let me try just printing the key code here. Nothing. All right. Let's do this on the, and this I'll describe as types as you would normally expect. You push the key, it goes off. After some delay, if the key is still held down, it goes off some more. Let's do key typed or key pressed next. Okay, for key pressed, I type A. Similar thing, right? But you'll notice that when I type here, it starts repeating keys immediately. There's really not a delay. So I usually don't use this one either. I don't know if they have the same delay and if it's just an illusion or what, but I usually don't want to do this one either for the same reason. It fires off repeatedly. But if that's something you do want to do, which we are going to want to do for some of our applications here, for example, if we wanted to use the arrow keys to move around, this would be the one we'd probably want, right? We want it to take the event and then fire it repeatedly. So this one, triggers when the key is pressed down, and then repeatedly until it's let go. And there's a constant rate at which it triggers, so you don't have to worry about it changing between frames or whatever. I don't remember how many times a second it is, but it's quite a few. And now notice that we have the key code here in this one too. I forgot to include it in the copy and paste, so I just added it really quick there. But notice that we also have the key code here. And this is basically like, if you are familiar with a system like ASCII or something, where every character has its own numerical code, it's basically that. So we've got A is 65, B is 66, C is 67, D is 68. Unfortunately, 0 through 9 are not 0 through 9. They're 48, 49, 50, etc. And the 0 through 9 on the numpad are different. So if I push 0 on the numpad instead, that's 96, and 9 is 9. That lets you differentiate between the numerical keys on top of your keyboard and the numerical keys that are on your numpad. You got some, like tilde, shift is detected here, alt is detected here, and control is not. So shift and alt you can use with the key press. Control, you can't. The Windows key, you can't either. And then, enter. Enter is a valid key there too. And notice that when I press enter, it uses the new line character for e.getKeyChar, which ends up making a new line in my console too. And enter is 10. And space. Space, of course, also makes a space instead of a character. Alright, so at some points it'll be easier for you to use the code instead of the character. So for example, if you're trying to pick up enter, space, shift, or control, it's easier to use their code. So 10 for enter, 32 for space, whatever it is for shift and alt. The easiest way, obviously, to figure out what the key code is just to print it to the console and look. You could look it up, but that'll take you longer than just printing it to the console and looking. So if you ever forget what enter or space is or whatever, just print e.getKeyCode to the console and you've got it. Alright, so if you are doing something that only happens once, then you're probably going to be using getKeyReleased instead. That's going to be the most useful for events that are supposed to happen just a single time. So if I press A and then I let go, I get 1A. I press A again. If I hold it, it doesn't matter how long I hold it for. If I let go, I get 1A. So most of the events that are supposed to happen just the one time, you're probably going to use the key released mechanism. So triggers when the key is released. Just once. Alright, let me do a poll to see if everybody understands what condition to use it in. Let's see a game moving with WASD. Let's do another poll. Most people identified that as pressed. How about a game where a click is supposed to shoot something? How about an application where hitting the space bar 3 times quits out of it? Most people got the first one right. A game where you move with WASD, that should trigger on key press because you want the motion to continue as the key is being held down. The second question's more of a mixed bag. A game where a click shoots. Well, it depends, right? Because if the click happens on pressed, That's probably the best way to go, but you might have a system where you do it on release too, but I would argue that pressed is the pretty obvious answer for the second one. So I would say that it should be pressed. Clicked, which is what most people voted for, is the worst choice because it only happens when the mouse is released, but not if moved. And of course, if you have a shooting game, you want to be able to move, so it's going to be either pressed or released, but you don't want it to be clicked because you definitely don't want it to happen on a release, but only if the person doesn't move the mouse in the interim. You want it to happen on press or release, regardless of movement. So clicked is used in applications with a real user interface to indicate that the click is basically deliberate. And most of the interfaces you probably use are like that. So if you open up any application that you've got, let's say it's Eclipse, right? If I click help and then I move away, it'll kind of undo it at the end. But even Eclipse, right, help activates on press, not on click. It activates as soon as the mouse comes down onto it. Then the third question, a application where hitting space 3 times quits, most people got that right. It's definitely released because if the event triggered on typed or pressed, then it would trigger repeatedly if you held the space key down. And of course, we definitely don't want holding the space key to be misconstrued as 3 taps. So a release is a single tap in that case. The other two, the typed and pressed options, could trigger space repeatedly with 1 press and accidentally read 3 when they only actually pressed it once. Okay, so those are all the different kinds of inputs. Now let's use those for something useful. So we've got these 4 rectangles here that we made, the rectangle array, and I gave them all index names. Last time before we left I had made an error. I had 2 or 3 of them using the same index. That was the mistake last time. So I gave them all named indexes, and then I instantiated a rectangle at different places around the screen, so at all of the different exactly 1/4 centered points. So there, and there are those 4 rectangles. Now let's say that I want to be able to move those rectangles around. I'm going to do it with the mouse first, and I'm going to enable the movement for all 4 of them at the same time. But I'm going to start first with just being able to move the top left one. And I want to get you guys familiar with these array operations and having an array of things and all of them behaving in the same way but being all registered and all of that stuff together. So it's some practice for you to have, instead of 1 variable, an array of complicated objects. Okay, so for something to move, I probably want to be able to like click and drag it or something. Let's start with the most basic. Let's go with, I want the top left rectangle to say something when I click on it. So I'm going to modify my mouse pressed method to accomplish this. So I want the top left rectangle to say something when I click on it. So if, and then we're looking at, it was called rects of, and if you've forgotten what you named the constants, again, the really nice thing about this is that you can use it to refer to all the fields at the top. Some people also use the outline for this. So if I had forgotten that I called it top left, I could have done this, type the dot, and then look through all the names till I found the one that was similar. Or I could look over here in the outline and we'll see that all my fields are listed there. So I could have just checked real quick. It's another reason why some people really like that outline view. Again, if you want to bring that back, it's Window, Show View, Outline. Helpful here because you've got all your different mouse and keyboard events listed on the side there, so you can quickly jump to the one you want. So if I want pressed real quick, there we go, I clicked it and I jumped to it. Alright, so I want to see if the rectangle contains the click point, and this works exactly the same way as the contains method that we wrote for our homework. So I want to see if rects of top left contains, and then what point am I looking for? What do I want to put in the argument for contains? This is a really easy question. I gave it away, so in either chat, what should I put inside of the arguments for contains? It takes either a point or an x and a y location. I want to use the point variety, but you can use either. It's the same thing. So what do I put inside the parentheses for the argument for contains? What do I put inside the parentheses? For contains. Contains takes a point 2D, actually. There is a different point too, but Java will figure it out for you, so you don't have to worry about that. While you're thinking about that, I also want to point out one caveat if you're working on Swing and you haven't imported point yet, which is obviously how you're going to start. So let me delete the import for point. Where's it at? It's going to come with the JPanel, so that shouldn't be a problem. But let's say that you didn't import point for some reason. It's going to offer you potentially to import the point class that you made in your homework. Obviously, don't do that. You want the built-in Java one. So if it offers you to import a point class, make sure you import the right one, the one from the Java library, not the one from your homework. All right, nobody answered, but it's an easy question. It's e.getPoint, right? It's the one that we were already using previously, the mouse events point, the one that we were printing out. So remember, the mouse event in all these different listener methods is e, and if we want to see the point that the mouse event occurred at, it would be e.getPoint, and I'll just print out something like clicked the rectangle. Lovely, click the rectangle. So that's the top left, and there we go. I can see I can click it now. If I click anywhere that's not in there, then the click is not contained, and it doesn't work. All right, so this one's going to be a complicated question. How do I do this? I'm going to type it in the comment again. How do I do this for all 4 rectangles in the array? So that's the question in either chat. How do I do this for all 4 rectangles in the array? How do I make it so that they print out that they've been clicked? And do that for all 4 rectangles. So somebody said for loop. That is definitely the right move there. So for int I equals something, I is less than something, I plus plus. What do I put in the missing areas there? That's right, so we're looping through the rectangles. So I is less than rect.length. We're looping through our rectangles array, and then rather than saying rect of top left, of course, we're going to say rect of I. We're going to loop through all 4 of them, or all the rectangles in our array. So make a note of this because you are going to use it for your homework as well as many other places, the array of many rectangles or many objects or whatnot that all need to be clicked on. I'll delete the comment there. All right, so this should make it so that all 4 rectangles now print out that they've been clicked. So clicked, 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 and that's all. All right, so anywhere else doesn't do anything. Clicking inside of them counts. Okay, but let's say that I want to be able to click on the rectangle and then drag it around. So I'm able to click on the rectangle and then drag it around. So in order for me to do this, being able to click on it and drag it around, I need to know which rectangle you've clicked on. And then I'm going to need to do something to that rectangle in the mouse dragged event. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remember which rectangle you've clicked on in mouse pressed. And then I'm going to move it around in mouse dragged. And then I'm going to forget which rectangle I've clicked on in mouse released. So let's see how that works. If rect of I.contains e.getPoint, so if it contains the mouse click, I'm going to remember it. How can I remember a rectangle in such a way that I can then access it in mouse dragged later? So how can I remember a rectangle? There's actually 2 ways that we could do it here. And in either chat, let me know what you think. How can I store which rectangle you clicked on in such a way that you'll be able to access it in mouse dragged later on? How can I store it? So, someone said that we could call the mouse drag method. So the thing with all the listener methods is you should never call them directly. They all get called when their events trigger, but they can't be called manually. So the mouse pressed method goes off when the mouse is pushed. We can't just, or we shouldn't just call it from anywhere else. So basically these listener events are special in the sense that we never call them directly. And if we did, right, if we did call mouse drag directly, we still wouldn't be able to actually do something when the mouse is dragged, because that's actually a method that triggers repeatedly as the mouse is held down. So just triggering it once wouldn't be enough. We need to make sure that that rectangle gets updated repeatedly as the mouse continues to move. So our two approaches here are going to be to save the index or save the rectangle. What do I mean by the index? Well, we have all the rectangles stored in this array, so we could just keep track of which index you pushed and save that. Alternatively, we store the actual rectangle object. So I'm going to do that one. I'm going to do the rectangle object because that's more general. It works for not an array too. So I'm going to call it rectangle 2D.double, and I'll call it dragged. This is the rectangle that you're currently dragging. Okay, and when you click on a rectangle, it's going to say dragged equals and then the one that you clicked on. The dragged equals and then the one that you clicked on. And when your mouse moves after that, I'm going to check. If dragged is not equal to null, you always have to do a null check when null is a possibility, and in this case it's definitely a possibility. When dragged is not equal to null, then I'm going to change the x and the y position of the rectangle known as dragged. So how do I update the x and the y position of the rectangle being dragged to the x and the y position of the mouse? So the x and the y fields of any rectangle, as you saw from the quiz, are public, and you can set them directly. You don't need a setter, so you could do drag.x equals. What do I set it equal to? What do I do on the right-hand side? So I've got a rectangle that I've called dragged. Let's see if I can get everything on the screen together. I've set the rectangle called dragged to the rectangle that you click when you click one with the mouse. And then I want to update dragged x position to where your mouse is at. That's right, we got e.getX. We're going to read the mouse event and update the x position there. We're obviously going to do the same thing for the y position. So let's try that out. Nothing happened. And this brings us to the first big caveat with swing, which is that the screen doesn't redraw until you tell it to. And the way that you tell it to redraw is by using a special command called Repaint. So Repaint is going to be very important to remember. If anything moves and you want the screen to redraw, you must call Repaint. So anytime you want the screen to redraw, you must call Repaint, or nothing will happen. And all Repaint does is calls paint component. This method that does all the drawing. And it just calls this again. And so what happens when Repaint gets called? It picks up the graphics object, the pen or what have you. It erases the screen with this line. And then it just executes all of this again. Changes the stroke size to 10, sets it to black, draws all the shapes you had on the screen, sets the color to black, draws all their outlines, and then draws all the other stuff that we were messing around with. So you can see how this could get pretty bogged down if you have too much happening in the paint component method, especially if you're trying to do this many times a second. But the dragged event fires off again like 30, 60 times a second, and we're going to see that it's actually not at all a problem. So, whee! I think I accidentally said, yeah. Forgot to set the Y. Alright, there we go. Whee! Look at it go. And drag our rectangle around. You'll see it gets anchored to the top left corner, because that's what the top left corner's X and Y is. So for another quick challenge, I'll post this in general chat. How do I get the square to be centered around the mouse as I drag it? So how do I get the square to be centered around the mouse as I drag it? Whee, look at you go, square. The whole world to see. How do I get it to be centered around the mouse as I drag it? So right now it's centered the top left corner, which is a little bit awkward, by the way, because if I click the bottom right, it just kind of snaps to the top left corner. But that's fine. That's how most applications work anyway. All but the most kind of paint-oriented applications will work that way anywho. How do I get it to be centered around the mouse? I've already gone into the centering thing a few times. It's one of those frustrating elements of swing. How do you center things instead of having their top left anchor to an X and Y? So I answered this the other day, how you center something around a point. It's the same thing. Close, close. So the answer I got in chat has to do with ease width, but E is a mouse event. Mouse events don't have width. They have an X and a Y location and a time and stuff, but they don't have a width. Fun shapes. Okay, yeah, drag dot width over 2. So if I wanted to center it, I could, when I add or subtract, let's see, drag dot width over 2. And then for this one, do I add or subtract? Let's see, drag dot height over 2. So I'm going to use the width and the height in order to center them. Ta-da! So now it's centered around the mouse instead of being locked to the corner. So I added minus drag dot width and minus drag dot height over 2 to my dimension. So it takes the mouse's X location and then subtracts half the width and half the height in order for the square center to be at the mouse's X and Y location rather than the X's or the square's top left corner. Okay, next challenge is that there is a bug. There's a bug here, and the bug is as such. So I'm dragging this square around. Let's say that I click over here off in the ether. So I'm clicking not on a red square. It flies over to me. Okay, let me try that again. I'm going to leave it parked over there, and then I'm going to click over here down in the ether. Oh, there it is. One more time, so I don't have it locked in. And I click over here, and there it is. I can also drag things off the screen, which you could consider a bug or not, but well, we'll leave that for now. But how do I fix this bug? How do I fix the fact that the square I haven't clicked gets dragged? And why does that happen, I guess, if you can explain it. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with our dragged object, the life cycle of that dragged object. So how can I fix that bug? This is a real object-oriented question, right? Because we set our dragged object up to a reference. It references one of those 4 objects in the rectangles array. At the end of mouse drag to make drag null. What do you mean at the end of mouse drag? If I do this, for example, right, if I set dragged equal to null at the end of mouse dragged in that sense, then it's going to break my ability to drag. It'll drag for 1 frame, and then it'll get set to null and it'll go bye-bye. So I can't drag anymore. I kind of inch things along 1 frame at a time. But I can't actually drag things anymore. But the logic is correct. I do need to release dragged because I set it when the mouse is pressed down. I set that reference when the mouse is pressed down, but then I've never released it. And so next time you press the mouse, the dragged event still goes off. Okay, and dragged is not null next time the dragged event goes off. Even though you haven't clicked anything, it's still there from when you clicked it last time. So the dragged event goes off, and basically the last thing that you clicked starts getting dragged. So where do I want to release the mouse drag? And this line is correct. I do want to release it. I want to set it back to null, but where do I want to do that? So few people awake today. You're making me tired with your lack of desire to answer these questions. Where do I set dragged to null? At the end of, I forgot the method name. I'll give you a hint. It's on the screen. It's on the screen. So if I put it at the end of Repaint, if I put it at the end of paint component, right, then it would be released again at the end of the dragged, basically. Because remember, at the end of every drag event, we then repaint the screen. So we would only get through 1 drag event, 1 frame, before the repaint triggers, and then the drag is released, and we can no longer drag it again. So that wouldn't be it either. We don't want to release it when the drawing ends. We want to release it at a particular point logically. So just think about when you actually want to let go of the square. Right, mouse released is the answer. So we want to let go of our dragged square in mouse released. So we're going to be setting it to null when you let the mouse go. This fixes the bug, so now when you drag a square around and then let go, that dragged variable is set to null. Next time you click elsewhere on the screen, it's not null, or it is null, and nothing happens because nothing's getting dragged around, and I can now drag other squares as I wish. Another, I guess you could call it a bug, is what happens when 2 squares are on top of one another. Do they both get dragged, or just one of them get dragged? It depends on your intent. If your intent is for one of them to get dragged, then we've done this perfectly, because just one of them does. If your intent was for both, then you're wrong. So sometimes it depends on what functionality you want. Okay, so that's how to click and drag something. That's a very useful functionality to have. Let's look at how to make something move with the mouse and keyboard. Or so just with the keyboard now. We already did the mouse. So let's make a new rectangle just for this purpose. So I'm going to make rectangle 2D.double keyboard mover, I'll call it. Should keyboard be a lowercase b? Keyboard's one word, isn't it? I'll call it keyboard mover. And I'll just put this at some random place right off the bat. So rectangle 2D.double. Let's say it's 100, 100, and it's 50 by 50 big. Well, let's make it a different size so it differentiates from the other ones. Okay, so I've made a new rectangle. I have placed it somewhere on the screen. Where is it? I don't see it. What did I forget to do? How come I can't see my beautiful new keyboard mover rectangle on the screen? How come I can't see it? Well, I forgot to paint it, right? So I have to paint it somewhere. Let's just do it up here. I'll include it with the painting from the others. So I'm going to do, whoopsie daisy, g.draw, I called it keyboard mover, and I'll fill it in red along with the other shapes that were being drawn earlier. So now it's being drawn to the screen. Now we should be able to see it. There it is. That's my keyboard mover. The bigger one is the keyboard mover. Okay, so I want keyboard mover to move when I press the arrow keys. This is going to be pretty straightforward. So I'm going to do it on press. And let's say that I want to move with the WASD keys. So I could do something like this. If e.getKey character equals W, and then I would move forward. So let's print this out and see if this works. Forward. Okay. So there's W, and it's printing out forward to the console. Okay, it's not printing that out when I use the other arrow keys or any other key on the keyboard, so it only prints that out for forward, so that's correct. I could do it like that, and then I could add S and A and D, but then I have 4 if statements, and that feels like a little much to me, so I'm going to use a switch statement instead. I'm going to do switch on e.getKey character, and I'm going to add my cases this way. So I've got my case W, I've got my case S, I've got my case A, I've got my case D, and then I've got my default, which is just going to do nothing. Okay, and remember I need to add that break statement to all of them as well. So I've got my break, my break, my break, and my break. Now that I have my cases set up, let me get rid of this if statement, I don't need that guy anymore. I'm going to have that keyboard mover move up, down, left, to right. So in the case of up, what do I do? So it's keyboard mover dot Y. How do I move it up? I'm going to do A and S while I await your answer in either chat. So keyboard mover dot X for A, which is left. I'll just say 5. How do I move it up? Do you want to do for right where it's motion? Oh, left is negative, right is positive. Do you want to do plus equals a negative or minus equals? That's up to you. I should probably label these with comments too. Up, down, left, right. I already made a mistake here because that's not down. There we go. So how do I move up? Is it minus 5 or positive 5? That's the question I'm asking. Which one is up? So I got an answer of positive. Up is positive, right? Positive 5. Let's see. Okay, first of all, nothing happens. What did I forget to do? What did I forget to do? Here's a hint. What did I forget to do? Change your answer. It's negative 5. Negative is the right answer. Remember, up is negative. Down is positive in Swing's weird backwards coordinate system. So down is the positive one. And what did I forget to do? Why aren't my key events showing up on the screen? So how come? Let's see, I'm going to hold down the S key, nothing happens. I'm going to hold down the D key, nothing happens. And oh, look, it just moved randomly. Hold down the S key some more, nothing happens. Just moved some more. Let's hold down the A key. Oh, there it is again. What's going on? What did I forget to do? Yep, I forgot to repaint. Good answer. Always remember to repaint or your screen doesn't update. I also put this in the wrong place. I put it in released. I don't want everything to happen just once when I push the key down. I want it to happen as long as the key is pressed. So I'm going to put it over into key pressed instead. So I moved it to key pressed. I added the repaint, and now I can move my square with WASD. It's like a real video game already. Look at me go. And not only can I do that, but I can also drag squares at the same time. So look at that. I've got everything that I need. Here's another, you could potentially call it a bug. I can't move diagonally. Why can't I move diagonally? Because I've made this a switch statement. How do I get diagonal movement? How do I get more than one key at once? Swing sucks at this, is unfortunately the answer. So I guess the real answer is don't. But I don't know. Maybe it's something that we'll look into later. Let's see what tries to happen. I'm just going to print a couple things. So let's just print that your key is pressed. What happens when you press multiple keys at the same time? So let's say I press F and then G at the same time. G takes over, right? So the second key that I pressed is the one that ends up getting all of its events captured. Okay, I pressed R and I pressed T. So T took over. I can do the same thing for the key typed method. Try it there. So I press F and I press G, and now G took over. I don't see the F's at all anymore. I pressed R and I pressed T, and now T took over. I see. So what do you do if you want diagonal motion? What if you want to handle two keys down at the same time? Well, you kind of have to hack it in, and it's kind of complicated, right? So you would detect both of those keys when they were pressed, and then you would lock in that there's diagonal motion happening from that point on. And then you have to capture the release. You see what I mean? So it's quite complicated. You can't just capture two keys being pressed in the same key event. Pressed only captures one key getting pushed down. So if you want to handle diagonal motion, you have to handle, well, W was pressed and A was pressed. So they've both been pressed. That means we should be moving diagonally. Complicated. All right, so we're not going to do that, but it's something you might want to think about if you want a real challenge. Support diagonal movement. Okay, that's it for today. Your homework is still due on... There's a homework due tonight at midnight, and then, well, for some of you who got an extension, sorry. The rest of you, I just freaked out. The homework is due next week on Thursday, and for some of you, the last homework is due tonight at midnight. I'll probably post the answer on Friday or so it can help you with the next homework. And there's an exam on Thursday as well. Remember, I think the exam is Thursday, so Tuesday will be our last class day. The exam will probably not have swing at all, maybe one or two questions. Mostly it's like questions from the quiz, but in a slightly easier format, so the quizzes are a little bit more challenging. The exam will be like those questions, but a little bit more boilerplate and less time constraint, obviously. Okay, that's it for today. See you next week, actually. Bye.